4-H Alberta's webinar on applying the 4-H in Canada youth safety policies. Your time and commitment to helping ensure that 4-H members have a safe, fun, and inclusive environment where they are supported by caring leaders in learning to do by doing is greatly appreciated. This training will introduce you to the youth safety at 4-H Canada policies and how they apply to common 4-H scenarios. The training will also highlight your responsibility as a trained leader for planning and implementing youth safety and how to report any concerns. When you see a picture like this, how do you think the kids are feeling? How about the supervisors? Would you have any worries? Overall, this looks like a fun and enjoyable activity. Hopefully everyone is feeling safe because the youth have their life jackets on, they received instruction before starting, perhaps there is a leader close by in another canoe, and you have a lifeguard on duty. While you may not have thought about it in exactly this way, all of these things are techniques to manage risk. When everyone at 4-H pays attention to risk management, youth feel safe and can focus on learning and developing skills. Staff and volunteers feel protected and prepared, and liability exposure is limited. This is the 4-H Canada Positive Youth Development Formula. The 4-H Canada essential elements are the ingredients at the core of the honeycomb model. Youth safety is the top priority. The caring leaders in 4-H are creating learn to do by doing activities in safe, fun, and inclusive environments. Building a sense of purpose, positive values, and a sense of responsibility, mastering skills, and developing skills in leadership, planning, and decision-making is our recipe for building responsible, caring, and contributing young people. So how does 4-H manage risk to ensure our youth and leaders are safe? There are three main components of risk management. They include policies that provide best practices, for example, the rule of two and screening practices for new volunteers, procedures and structures that help manage the organization, for example, incident reporting, which ensures issues are resolved and improvements can be made, and the organizational culture. We are creating open dialogue about youth safety, creating an environment where it is expected and where everyone is supported in voicing any concerns. Now, this doesn't mean all the fun is gone from our program. Remember, fun is also listed in our core elements. What it does mean is that 4-H risk management components are aligned with our mission and allow youth to engage safely in experiential education programs, letting them learn to do by doing. Here is a great example of learn to do by doing. It's the regional project show, and it's being held at the Ag Society grounds near downtown of a local community. Members are busy showing their animals for a portion of the day. When they are done, some are enjoying games in the campsite. Let's consider the youth safety and risk components at play in this scenario. Being in town, there are risks associated with public access, animals getting loose, and traffic. And there are risks whenever working with animals. There are also benefits to this type of program, though. The effort to organize a regional show certainly shows the support of our leaders and parents. They are the caring adults. The wrap-up of a project with a show such as this pulls together many of the components on the honeycomb: responsibility, skill mastery, a sense of purpose, and leadership development. Unfortunately, a parent from the club notices that several members appear to be drunk, but there's no sign of any alcohol. The parent reports to you what they saw. The risks and issues have now increased. This is a case of underage drinking. It raises questions about when the program officially begins and ends. Who's responsible for supervision? There has been misconduct by members and also parents. Are you clear on the steps for reporting this type of incident? Is there a consequence for the members or their parents? To mitigate these risks before the program begins or for future programs, it's important to be clear on when the program begins and ends, the supervision, and behavior expected of youth. So while this sounds like a fun and hopefully inclusive day, we may have failed to put procedures in place to ensure it was safe. Remember, safe programs don't just happen. They are designed, implemented, and evaluated in a way that youth safety is a priority and emphasized throughout the entire program. Let's look at the 4-H risk management components that are in place. We all encounter risk every day and have naturally developed ways to mitigate the risks and stay safe. For instance, we've all learned to look both ways before we cross the street. Many of the risks identified in the regional show scenario can be addressed by practices that have become second nature to us. But to ensure they are adopted as our culture at 4-H, a culture of safety, it is important they are documented as our guiding policies and procedures. So let's look at those pieces. First, to mitigate risk to the 4-H organization and its reputation, 4-H ensures that the entire organization is protected by having appropriate insurance. The reputation of the organization is protected by ensuring that constitutions and bylaws are upheld. Brand agreements ensure control over how the 4-H logo is used, and all participants are required to follow the code of conduct. To mitigate risk in programs, 4-H Alberta requirements and event guidelines ensure that programs follow safety standards. Project safety is a critical part of member learning and is included in project resources and the experience of our leaders. The provincial organization ensures there are appropriate registration forms and waivers to protect everyone registered or leading our programs. To mitigate risk in relation to youth safety, the policies outline how leaders are screened and how procedures for working and communicating safely with youth and how to handle incidents when they arise. This is where we will spend the majority of time during this webinar. In 2018, 4-H Canada delivered a risk management report to provincial boards and executive directors that identified a number of areas where the 4-H movement in Canada needed to rise to a consistent standard of practice. The diversity of the 4-H program across Canada is something to be celebrated. However, it is also an area of risk, as the content and caliber of youth safety policies, processes, and standards differed significantly across the country. Subsequent reviews by legal counsel recommended improved continuity in standards and practices across the country. We just looked at this slide a minute ago, but now it has been updated to highlight the areas that legal identified as being inconsistent. That's the third column. The inconsistency and confusion possible was highlighted in our regional show scenario. There was uncertainty as to who is responsible for providing supervision outside of the show times. Is underage drinking considered misconduct on the part of the youth? Were the leaders fulfilling their responsibilities to provide supervision? And what are the next steps for handling this situation? An incident report? Are there consequences? And that is what we are here to talk about today. The safety and well-being of youth members is the top priority of 4-H, and the entire 4-H network in Canada is working to update youth safety policies and procedures to ensure improved continuity and practices across the country. With a renewed focus on youth safety, 4-H Canada and its provincial partners have been very busy. 4-H Canada and each of the provincial 4-H organizations has been working together to ensure that we have consistent policies and procedures to provide safe and successful programs for our members, safeguard the trust and loyalty of 4-H families, and ensure leaders have the resources and training to feel supported and prepared. Since 2018-19, several shared policies and resources have been developed, including the Commit to Kids Abuse Prevention and Duty to Report training, a National Code of Conduct, a National Inclusion Statement, and the Youth Safety at 4-H in Canada Policy Manual and FAQs. Parents are increasingly aware and making choices based on the caliber of program and youth safety standards. Many youth organizations are facing the same challenges, and recognizing an old school mentality and culture of inconvenience can no longer drive policy and practice. To ensure the long-term success of 4-H, we must have in place industry best standards for youth organizations. 4-H Canada has reviewed the practices of industry experts like Commit to Kids, Kids Help Phone, the Coaching Association of Canada, and youth organizations such as Scouts and Girl Guides, and have used them to develop our own policies. A great tool for evaluating if 4-H is meeting industry standards is the checklist for parents on how to choose a child-safe organization. We're going to take a little bit closer look. In the step 2, before choosing the organization, ask the following questions. Questions include, does your organization train volunteers about child sexual abuse? Does your organization have a code of conduct for adults working with children? Does it outline clear expectations about boundaries between volunteers and children, for parents? Do you have screening and hiring processes for staff and volunteers? What is the organization's policy for reporting child abuse or staff misconduct? Step 3 asks specific questions about how risk is managed for activities and includes off-site activities, transportation of children, overnight trips, overnight programs such as camps, children visiting volunteers' homes, volunteers having contact with children outside their work duties, and volunteers visiting a child's home. And this is where we have landed in 2020. A comprehensive review and consultation within the youth industry and with all provincial 4-H organizations has resulted in the development of the Youth Safety at 4-H in Canada Policy Manual and training on it for staff and leaders in 4-H organizations across Canada. For some of you, especially if you're new to 4-H, you may be unsure of the different organizational layers in 4-H and what programs and policies they are responsible for. As the strong base of 4-H across the country are the 4-H clubs. Districts and regional councils are made up of volunteers who step beyond their club. Sanctioned event committees may happen at a club event or at district, regional, and provincial levels. At this level, adult leaders and volunteers and youth participants are all involved. Above that is the provincial 4-H organizations, such as 4-H Alberta. There is also a board made up of volunteers who care deeply about the program. But we also have a staff group who are hired to support and guide leaders and members. Above that is 4-H Canada, who oversees all provincial organizations, and again, has a volunteer board of directors and a staff component. The blue circle in the top left corner is YAC. That is the Youth Advisory Committee or Council. That committee is made up of a youth representative from each province. In 4-H Alberta, we select our representative from our group of provincial ambassadors. They act as youth input to the 4-H Canada board. Hopefully that org chart gives you a little bit of an idea where you fit in and the vast network within Alberta and across 4-H. Each layer of 4-H has a different focus on youth programs, leader supports, and policy and program supports. 4-H Canada is responsible for national level programming and initiatives, scholarships and internships. They provide cross-country training on national policy and programs to provincial staff and supports the 4-H Learns resources. They are also responsible for youth safety policies, insurance, and national funding and initiatives. 4-H Alberta is responsible for provincial level programming, leader screening and training, project and program support, and policies and procedures that align with 4-H Canada's and the needs of our members and leaders. 4-H Alberta is in the process of reviewing and developing policies and procedures to ensure that we are in alignment with those of 4-H Canada. Club leaders are responsible for coordinating club meetings and projects, ensuring members are supported in meeting member requirements, and ensuring activities at the club, district, and regional level meet safety requirements. Now that you have a background on the renewed emphasis on risk management at 4-H, let's dive into the new policy manual. To successfully implement the youth safety policies, it is key that all staff, leaders, and volunteers are provided with the resources to grow their knowledge and skills to be able to follow and apply the policies in programs at every level. I encourage you to read it cover to cover, but today we'll focus on just the key youth safety elements and a couple of examples of how the policies apply in different situations. 4-H in Canada now has one consistent spot to look to for national youth safety policies and references to provincial procedures. As many of the policies refer to your role as a leader or volunteer, it is important that you understand the responsibility required of those roles. So let's start with the screening and training policy, and then we'll come back to the code of conduct and inclusion statement. The screening and training policy outlines the requirements for different roles within 4-H in Canada. Adults and older youth in a position of trust within 4-H must complete screening and training requirements before supervising and working with youth. This ensures that they are aware of their responsibilities as caring adults in adult-youth partnerships and in delivering safe and meaningful experiences. 4-H Alberta and the National Office are required to maintain secure records of all screening and training requirements either in progress or completed. In 4-H Alberta, our terminology is changing a little. We will now refer to trained leaders, those who have been screened and have also completed Commit to Kids and the youth safety training, and screened volunteers, those who have completed screening but have not necessarily completed the training. Screening in 4-H Alberta includes an online application, provision of references, and providing a criminal record check, including a vulnerable sector check. Those who have neither screening or training may be parents, guests, or other supporters. The key difference between our trained leaders and screened volunteers is the requirement that trained leaders take additional training, such as this youth training, Commit to Kids, and any additional leader training offered by 4-H Alberta. It is the expectation that trained leaders are responsible for the risk management and programming within the club or at an event, while the additional screened volunteers are the extra eyes and ears needed to ensure the program is safely delivered. The Code of Conduct is your guide to interacting with youth, families, and other leaders, and is also how you should expect to be treated as a leader. If concerning behavior arises, the Code of Conduct is the organization's tool for documenting incidents, determining consequences, and implementing change. It applies to everyone involved in 4-H. Youth, families, and leaders are required to review and sign it every year. It is available in your online profile with 4-H Alberta, and members will also find it in the new record book format. There is no tolerance for conduct that conflicts with the Code of Conduct for 4-H in Canada and other supporting policies. Behavior changes are encouraged through coaching and training first when possible, but more severe consequences can be enacted. As a leader, you are required to submit an incident report for behaviors that are considered misconduct. We'll talk about the misconduct policy and procedures a little bit later in the training. There are 4 main sections in the Code of Conduct. They are represent 4-H and myself in a positive way. This means be kind, respect others, play fair, be a positive representative of 4-H, care for your animals, and follow the law. The second section is to promote a safe, inclusive, and fun environment. This includes everyone being part of creating the culture of safety, no drugs or alcohol at youth events, inclusion, and the positive youth development formula. The third section is lead by example. Implement and adhere to all policies and procedures, be a positive leader, and encourage teamwork and collaboration. And finally, for staff and leaders, fulfill your role, your duties, act within your role, and keep information private. It's a great idea to take time at the beginning of each club year to review the Code of Conduct as a club. Members may make posters putting the Code of Conduct into their own words. They may also come up with club procedures for how to address concerns that are appropriate for their age. Regardless of how you approach it, reviewing it so that everyone understands it at the beginning of the year is important in ensuring that misconduct is kept to a minimum. Now that we've been through some policies, let's go back and revisit the regional show scenario that we started with. There's intentionally some ambiguity in how this case study was written. It is not clear if the leaders are still supervising or if the official 4-H program is over for the day. When planning achievement days or other events, clearly communicate to members and families when the supervised event begins and ends. Leaders have a duty to provide supervision and follow the rule of two throughout the event. However, let's look at the 4-H risk management components. The main issue is underage drinking and drinking at a 4-H event. The code of conduct, the duty to report misconduct, and the supervision policies will all need to be considered. 2 leaders should approach the parents and members to determine if the youth have been drinking. An incident report must be completed and submitted to the 4-H Alberta staff for review and to determine if there should be any additional consequences. The code of conduct should be reviewed and discussed with the club to ensure that all leaders and youth are clear that no alcohol is to be at youth events. The law must be followed, and you are to represent 4-H in a positive manner throughout the entire 4-H regional show. Moving on to the inclusion statement. 4-H Canada is open to all, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. As highlighted, any accommodations, changes, or exemptions will be assessed on an individual basis, taking into account the individual experience of the member and their family, and leaders are encouraged to work with individuals and their families to identify and discuss accommodations as required, and to reach out to 4-H Alberta or the National 4-H Office staff for help with unresolved concerns. This means that as a trained leader, you work with families to understand the accommodations needed to allow for participation while checking your own biases, speaking up if you witness discrimination, and promoting an environment where others can speak up as well. Provincial staff can support you in being creative to accommodate members' needs while still meeting the basic member requirements. Moving on to the supervision policy, in order to ensure that our projects, programs, and events are safe, inclusive, and fun, we must all follow the rule of two, which is designed to protect youth and adults in potentially vulnerable situations. Supervision ratios, which ensure that there is always enough staff, leaders, and volunteers to deliver a safe and meaningful program. Enough leaders allow for sharing the load of planning and leading activities, assisting youth, and being prepared for the unexpected situations. Club supervision requirements ensure that at least 2 leaders are registered with the club that are not spouses to ensure there is no conflict of interest and that clubs follow best practices for youth safety. The rule of two applies to all 4-H club and project meetings, programming, events, and communications. There must always be a minimum of 2 screened adults who are not spouses, regardless of the number of youth members in attendance. All trained leaders and screened volunteers have met the application reference and police check screening requirements. Remember, the difference between a trained leader and a screened volunteer is the additional child protection training a trained leader has completed and their responsibility to implement safety and risk management practices. At a minimum, there must be 1 trained leader or staff and 1 additional screened volunteer. Additional non-screened guests or youth leaders, those who have completed Y-Lead or CIT, may be required in order to meet the programming ratios required to safely deliver programs, depending on the number of the youth members in attendance and the activity. For the protection of all, there must never be a situation where an adult is one-on-one with a youth who is not their child or ward within 4-H meetings, programming, or events. The purpose of this policy is to protect youth members, but also leaders, volunteers, and staff in potentially vulnerable situations. The goal for 4-H programming is to plan for and achieve the rightmost green level. Let's watch a short training video that will walk us through how the rule of two applies in different situations.
Welcome to 4-H Canada's Youth Safety Training on the Rule of Two. The Rule of Two is an important policy that helps protect members, volunteers, leaders, and staff in potentially vulnerable situations. It applies to any activity undertaken by 4-H, including meetings, travel, events, and electronic communication with youth members. You can find a full description of the policy in the Youth Safety at 4-H in Canada Policy Manual. With any 4-H programming, activities, or communications, The rule of two must be followed. The optimal situation is a minimum of 2 trained leaders for one or more youth, or at least 1 trained leader and 1 screened volunteer. Most important is that a leader or staff member is never alone with the youth. If that situation arises, it must be documented in an incident report. Let's look at some common scenarios of how the rule of two applies to a 4-H meeting and communications.
Hi, Katie. You are early for today's meeting. Why don't you head into the barn and start grooming the horses?
As outlined in the rule of two, an adult leader must never be alone with youth. What could the leader do in this situation?
Hi, Katie. You are early for today's meeting. Can you ask your mom to wait until our other leaders arrive?
Having a parent wait until another leader arrives is a great solution. At the beginning of each club year, it's important to communicate the rule of two to all families and youth so that they understand and support the policy. Parents are responsible for transporting youth to meetings and events, and for providing supervision outside of the official program.
Hi, Josh and Mike. What a great idea to bike over for the meeting. Let's wait outside so we can see when the other leaders and club members arrive.
Unexpected situations can arise, but the leader did the right thing by staying in public view when alone with youth. While this was unexpected, the leader must fill out a confidential incident report, just in case any questions arise.
Wow, what a great article on horse grooming. I know Mike just got a new horse and would love this. I'll send him the link.
While it's great to share resources with youth, remember it's not okay to communicate with youth via private messaging or text. Instead, communicate via group emails or chats with all leaders and members included. If communicating by email to youth, use a parent or another leader on all updates and replies. Now let's move to some scenarios common 4-H camps or other overnight accommodations.
Brianna, can I come sit with you? I know it's hard to be at camp when you're missing home.
While the leader has the best intentions to comfort Brianna, being alone in the cabin creates a vulnerable situation. Let's look at some safe options.
Brianna, can I come sit with you? I know it's hard when you're missing home. Sure.
Having 2 adults enter a private space to check on a youth is the best approach. Ask for permission to come in, and be conscious of the youth's personal space. Let's look at another option for helping Brianna.
Brianna, I know it's hard when you're missing home. Can you come and sit outside with me on the porch? I'd love to hear more about the pets you have at home. Okay.
Asking Brianna to come out into a public setting is a great choice. While still in view of other leaders and members, Brianna and the leader can have a quiet conversation. Leaders may find themselves in a similar situation when breaking into smaller groups in a classroom or at a public event such as a fair. While 2 leaders continue to oversee the safety of the entire group and have all the emergency contact information, small groups of youth with 1 leader may circulate in public view. Always keep the rule of two in mind when planning accommodations for a 4-H program. Remember that when at camp or in a hotel for an event, 2 trained leaders, chaperones, or camp counselors must complete room checks by standing in the doorway and looking in to ensure all the youth are accounted for. Adults should only enter a room if there's an immediate concern about the health or well-being of a member. Remember to always plan your program and activities to meet the green standard in the rule of two. For more information on the rule of two or any of the youth safety at 4-H in Canada policies, please visit 4-h-canada.ca or reach out to your provincial office.
While the rule of two helps protect youth and leaders, safe supervision ratios are also required in order to deliver a safe and meaningful program. This table outlines adult to youth supervision ratios for different age groups. The total youth count must include all youth and children who are participating in the program, including 4-H members and any other youth guests. The rule of two is always the minimum, and the ratios in the table apply to any portion of the next level of members. For example, if you have 22 Cleaver kids at a program, you'll need 5 adults. a minimum of 2 leaders to cover the first 10 Cleaver kids, and for the remaining 12 members, you'll need another 3 adults. The final ratio is 5 to 22. For a club to be in good standing and to host sanctioned meetings, programs, or events, there must be a minimum of 1 trained leader or staff and an additional screened volunteer who are not spouses registered with the club. Spouses may be part of the club leadership team, but there must always be a 3rd trained leader or screened volunteer present. This requirement is in place to ensure that the rule of 2 can be followed, to protect all parties, and to prevent any conflict of interest that may arise in the event of financial or other misconduct. The club registration must be on file with 4-H Alberta and will be reviewed each club year. Actions will be taken if clubs are not in compliance with these requirements by January. Let's jump ahead to the transportation policy, as there are typically a lot of questions on how to apply the rule of 2. Transportation is not part of a leader's role. Parents and guardians are responsible for transporting youth to and from 4-H meetings and events, and for ensuring that 2 trained leaders or screened volunteers are present before departing. Personal travel is not considered part of the 4-H program. Families who wish to arrange to carpool with other families do so at their own risk and should review their personal automobile insurance. What does this mean in terms of the ability to drive a family friend that is also a 4-H member on your own? In short, a leader may do so with the understanding that it is in their role as a family friend and not as a 4-H leader, nor as part of the 4-H program, and it would not be covered by 4-H insurance. Even though this is not part of the 4-H program, the rule of 2 is still a best practice that you should model as a leader. This type of situation should be avoided. Travel as a club to a sanctioned event is considered to be part of the 4-H program and is insured if the commercial transportation or carpooling is documented in an activity plan, is reviewed by 4-H Alberta, and is shared with parents in advance. The rule of 2 applies in each vehicle. For travel to be considered part of a sanctioned event, it must be planned in advance, adhere to the rule of 2, and be communicated. Parents and guardians must bring their youth to a meeting place for pickup, and then the rule of 2 applies on commercial transportation or in the private carpool. 2 trained leaders, screened volunteers, youth leaders, or parents of their own children must be in each vehicle transporting youth, and the sanctioned driver must be over 21. The age of 21 is a requirement to ensure that the driver is at least 4 years older than the majority of members and have an appropriate amount of maturity and driving experience. There are 4 different insurance policies that cover 4-H organizations across Canada. The first check mark relates to the accident insurance, which provides financial relief to staff, leaders, and youth if an injury or illness occurs during a sanctioned event. Expenses must be claimed through private insurance first. For example, this would apply if a member is injured grooming their animal at a club meeting, or leaders and youth are injured during club organized travel to a camp or conference. The second check mark relates to our general liability insurance, which protects 4-H and leaders against claims from third parties during a sanctioned event. This would come into play, for example, if a youth or leader damages a gate at a farm meeting. The third check mark is related to director and officer liability insurance. This protects leaders, directors, officers, and the organization for claims alleging a wrongful act. There is protection from these threats whether they have merit or not. For example, if there was a claim about mismanagement of organizational funds. The fourth check mark relates to abuse insurance, which protects the 4-H organization against financial loss due to claims of abuse by staff, leaders, or youth. Livestock are not covered by 4-H insurance. That responsibility always rests with the animal's owner. Likewise, personal vehicle damage is covered by the insured vehicle owner and their insurance, not 4-H. Typically, the youth travel policy applies to attending 4-H Canada organized programs or when a 4-H member is representing 4-H at a youth industry event. In these cases, youth may travel alone by air, train, or bus in order to meet up with a group attending a 4-H event or program, for interprovincial, national, or international events, or when selected nationally or provincially to represent 4-H at a conference or event hosted by another organization. Travel arrangements must be shared with youth and their parents or guardians well in advance, and permission forms must be signed and returned to the organizers. When youth arrive at their destination, the program begins and supervision policies will apply. Please refer to this policy for any additional guidelines on traveling as a group and if participants request independent travel before or after an event. So, we have covered the check-marked items, and there are only 3 policies left. Staff and trained leaders are responsible for conducting program safety assessments, activity plans, and implementing preventative procedures that follow all policies and guidelines. They are also responsible for coordinating the management of participants' health during 4-H activities, which includes collection of forms, providing first aid, and having an emergency response plan. Activities that abide by all policies are sanctioned 4-H events and have insurance coverage for youth leaders, volunteers, staff, and invited guests. Work within the 4-H guidelines to ensure that you are not taking on personal liability. What does the last statement about sanctioned events mean? While 4-H does not have a list of banned or excluded activities per se, provincial organizations have project and club resources that include safety practices for different types of activities. Leaders are also expected to follow industry best practices. For instance, equine members are required to wear helmets. If you have ideas for a new activity or project, please be sure to discuss them with your area coordinator first to ensure that you are implementing reasonable safety practices and are not taking on personal legal responsibility. To summarize the policy statements, as trained leader or staff, you are responsible for planning and running safe programs. This means that you should be familiar with the youth safety policies, as well as provincial safety and program procedures. Use the examples at the end of this training and the FAQs on 4-H Canada and 4-H Alberta's websites as a reference when you are planning. Follow 4-H Alberta procedures for collecting the signed code of conduct, registration forms, and any health information from members and leaders. The code of conduct and registration information should be shared with 4-H Alberta through the club registration process and by having individuals log in to their personal profiles. Complete an activity plan to help ensure that you are following safety procedures. Ask questions if you are planning a new event. Review the event when it's over and consider what can be done to improve it. Communicate, communicate, communicate with parents and guardians. Custody agreements can be important to understand as one example of communication required to help ensure that youth are kept safe. When required, share the activity plan and/or hold a short meeting to ensure that all questions are answered. Follow procedures for reporting incidents, and we'll talk about this shortly. Ask questions, share ideas, and reflect on your programs. It's a priority of 4-H to continue to review our youth safety procedures and the positive youth development outcomes of our programs at all levels. Completing a formalized activity plan is a new process in 4-H across Canada. Think of it as a field trip form that might come home from a school or camp. It is a tool for guiding those that are planning activities and events to review the different youth safety policies and have a standardized form for sharing that information with 4-H Alberta and then with participants and their families. When leaders and families are all on the same page about transportation, supervision, the activities involved, the program will run more smoothly in a safe, inclusive, and fun environment. Across Canada, an activity plan is required for any multi-club, district, or regional event, any 4-H activities that include 4-H organized transportation or accommodations, that involves high-risk activities such as skiing, water activities, paintball, recreational vehicles, or takes place in a location where a third-party service provider requires a waiver, for example, an archery range or a trampoline park. Next club year, we will be using the 4-H Canada web-based youth safety reporting platform that allows the organizing trained leader to complete a standardized online form. Until then, As an introduction to this, you can access the 4-H Alberta activity planning form on the 4-H Alberta website. It is available in the downloads section of the website, or as a link from the Leaders tab under Youth Safety, or from your area coordinator. This form will be directed to 4-H Alberta for review, and you will receive a reply with suggestions for sharing it with participants and families. It is not the intention to stop you from doing an activity, but to ensure that you have considered the risks and have made plans to mitigate them. District and regional meetings do not require an activity plan. Neither do club activities unless they meet the 4 requirements listed. Clubs are welcome to submit a plan for review if they are doing something new or would simply like input on whether their safety planning can be improved. While the hope is that your event or program runs smoothly, incidents can arise, and it's important to know how to address them and where to turn for assistance. In the next club year, the same 4-H Canada reporting site will be used for incident accident reporting. Again, for this year, we will be using a form located on the 4-H Alberta website to report any incidents. We'll look at the form in a bit more detail, but first, let's review when an incident must be reported. This table guides you through several issues, but let's focus on those related to the safety assessment and management policy first. An issue that can be easily remedied in the moment, such as a scrape, bump, upset tummy, or easily repaired maintenance issue, does not require an incident report. Your first aider or trained leader should keep a log of basic treatments and update parents accordingly. Property owners should be informed of basic damage or maintenance required. Anything more major than those examples does require an incident report to ensure that 4-H Alberta has the information needed to activate insurance, support anyone who's been injured, and review preventative procedures. If in doubt, it's always best to make a report to ensure that the information is recorded in case questions arise. Once you submit an incident report, which is the top blue step in this flowchart, it will be reviewed and managed by 4-H Alberta staff. Typically with safety concerns, the flow will follow the minor incident column. Provincial staff will contact the parties involved, connect with insurance, and report to 4-H Canada if required. Support will be provided to those involved and the incident reviewed to determine preventative steps that could be taken in the future. This may lead to training or updates to procedures. And we'll look more closely at the serious incident flow as we discuss misconduct concerns. Let's look at a scenario so you can see how the activity planning and incident reporting policies apply. The horse clubs in your district have voted to participate in the 4-H classes at a horse show being put on by the local Gymkhana Association. The 4-H classes are all on the first day of the 2-day show. Families feel that after trailering their horses to the show, it only makes sense for the members to participate in the open classes on the second day. 4-H leaders and chaperones are following the rule of 2 and supervising the youth throughout the weekend based on their activity plan. During an open class, a youth member is injured and their horse causes damage to exhibition property. The things that should be noted in the activity plan include transportation, accommodations, the activities or events that members can attend, which may mean adding a more detailed agenda, any first aid or emergency contact information, the confirmation that costs have been shared with families prior to registration. The things that would need to be recorded about the incident include the member information, details of the incident and any medical follow-up, the leader in charge, and the details of the event organizers and the venue, including their contact information. What can we learn from this scenario? To ensure youth and leaders are protected by insurance for 4-H planned transportation, accommodation, and events, a trained leader must complete and submit a detailed activity plan and share it with families. Planning ahead reduces risk, ensures the program runs smoothly, and that everyone is protected. Now let's take a look at the activity planning and accident incident report forms as they might look for this scenario. Let's walk through one option for completing a safety assessment using the new activity planning form. You can see this form and the accident incident report form on 4-H Canada's website, but again, we are asking that you do not use them for this year. These forms were designed to help everyone get used to completing them and the information you will need to collect to do so. Please use this form on the 4-H Alberta website. When the 4-H Canada one is to be used, the link on the 4-H Alberta page will change. This first screen is the basic explanation of the form and the entry of your email address so that we know who to contact for more information. The second page asks for the name of the event, the date. For multi-date events, please use the first day, contact or committee chair, and which 4-H groups are involved. The third page is all about supervision. Who is supervising, and if they are trained leaders, screened volunteers, or youth leaders? What type of 4-H members are involved? And are any other adults expected? An agenda can be added to this form or sent as an additional attachment. This page also has your supervision plan, showing that you've thought about how to protect the members and leaders. This includes information about transportation and accommodations, and any details about what members are required to bring with them. The next section is all about risk management. The details of any safety precautions you will be taking, including COVID mitigation, and if you will have a first aid kit available. What are your emergency response plans, including things that, which might include things like signage, posting emergency numbers, having traffic coordinators or gatekeepers? In this case, the majority of the emergency response plan will be the responsibility of the Gymkhana Association Organizing Committee. Are you using a third-party service provider? Can members bring a friend? If yes, ensuring that you have the appropriate emergency contact and health information should also be included in the previous questions. The final section is a series of confirmation questions designed to ensure that you have completed your safety assessment and shared all of the necessary information with all of the parties involved. Attendance, health and emergency contact information, sharing your information with those involved, considering all of the youth safety policies, having an approved budget, and ensuring that everyone is aware of the costs. Finally, do you have a plan to thank any sponsors or donors that may be helping you out? The final step is to attach any files needed to supplement your plan. These plans, when submitted, will be reviewed by 4-H Alberta staff. Any notes will be added, and a finalized plan will be returned to the trained leader who filed it. The final plan should be shared with parents and members. The other key form in the Youth Safety Reporting Platform is the 4-H Incident Accident Report. This form records the who, what, where, when, why, and how of any accident or incident. So who was involved and when did it happen? What type of incident or accident was it, including breaches of code of conduct? You'll then be asked for the details. What event did it happen at? What type of event or program was it? And which clubs, districts, or regions may be involved or affected? Describe the incident in detail, including the type of activity involved and where it occurred. Provide some details about the property where the incident accident occurred, and provide any details of medical care or other emergency services contacted. Provide details of whether or not parents and guardians were contacted and the decisions that were made. Did the accident incident require a report to other authorities, such as the police or family services? Be sure to add the injured youth, the trained leader, and any other key witnesses as parties on this form. Upload any key documents or photos that will support and explain the incident or accident. and the trained leader that has submitted this report will receive an email confirmation. 4-H Alberta staff will follow up and contact insurance and/or 4-H Canada as needed. Let's mix it up a bit as we move into the last few but very important policies, the duty to report and the misconduct reporting. First, a short 5-question true and false quiz to check your knowledge on the facts about child abuse in Canada. Some of this may seem similar to the material in the Commit to Kids training, but it is a good reminder and a bit of a wake-up call to the importance of your role when working with 4-H youth. True or false? Younger 4-H participants, 6 to 10 years of age, are most at risk of abuse by a teacher or volunteer. False. Almost 70% of those abused were in high school. Teens are vulnerable and may experience more inappropriate advances or abusive behaviors. We must be vigilant in protecting all children and youth. True or false? Strangers are the perpetrators in 1 in 5 violent offenses against children and youth. True. In 4 out of 5 or 80% of the cases, the perpetrator is someone known to the child or youth. Following the rule of 2 can significantly reduce opportunities for abuse to occur. Statistically, children or youth are abused by someone they know. The rule of 2 is an important tool that we can put in place to reduce vulnerable situations with children and youth and reduce the opportunity for those abuses to occur. This includes not only physical situations, but online as well. True or false? Youth living outside a metropolitan area are at a higher risk of family and non-family violence. True. Children and youth living in smaller cities, towns, and rural areas had a higher risk of both family and non-family violence based on police-reported data from 2010. Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver actually had rates of family violence against children and youth below the national average. Remember, over 83% of the participants in 4-H programs in Canada live outside urban areas. Children and youth in 4-H are vulnerable, and as leaders, we need to recognize when a young person may need support. Be aware of the indicators and be prepared for disclosure. Draw on this youth safety training, Commit to Kids training, and reach out to your 4-H Alberta staff for support. True or false? There is an equal balance of sexual offenses against males and females. False. Females accounted for 75% of cases and males only 25% of cases, according to a 2018 study from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Over 60% of participants in 4-H programs are female. Finally, true or false? An effective measure of risk is to review a person's standing in the community or their likability. False. A well-liked individual that contributes to their community is not exempt from the capacity to engage in behavior that exploits or harms children and youth. Being well-liked or good with kids does not equate to being ethical or trustworthy. 4-H has screening, interviewing, and reference check processes in place to ensure that we are following best practices in vetting all staff, leaders, and volunteers. The statistics that came up in those 5 questions unfortunately show that our 4-H youth and our communities are not immune to abuse and violence against youth and children. In 2018, a study from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection made preventative recommendations to school authorities around accountability, assessing and managing risk, and educating staff about abuse. At 4-H, we have included these best practices in updated policies and have rolled out the Commit to Kids training as well. Your participation in this training can make a real difference, so thank you. The key recommendations in the report were a policy for reporting and addressing inappropriate interactions, a policy that outlines the requirements for reporting concerns to superiors, and assurance of concerns being kept confidential. Unfortunately, people may tend to avoid addressing concerns of inappropriate behavior or even abuse out of a fear of not wanting to cause trouble or the fear of upsetting the individual. At 4-H, the Code of Conduct outlines the expectations and guidelines for everyone involved in 4-H activities, and that we will be vigilant in ensuring an environment that is safe and protects youth leaders, volunteers, and staff from emotional, physical, verbal, and sexual abuse. The duty to report and misconduct policy outlines procedures for reporting incidents and how they will be addressed swiftly and in a confidential manner, so the reporter can have confidence in the process, which leads us to the last policies. Everyone has a duty to report child abuse and neglect under Canadian child welfare laws. You are obligated to report child maltreatment if you know or suspect it is occurring. This is called the duty to report. Every person in Canada has the duty to report known or suspected child maltreatment by laws. As a youth serving organization, 4-H has made the Commit to Kids training on abuse prevention a requirement for being a trained leader to ensure our organization is prepared to uphold this duty. If you suspect a child is at harm, report it immediately to Child Protection Services. Remember that it is better to report and be wrong than to not report and be right. Use the online incident reporting system to file a confidential report with 4-H. Like the incident reporting flowchart, there are procedures for reporting concerns of a child being at harm or being abused. Incidents must always be reported to authorities first. If any of the parties involved are involved in 4-H, then complete a confidential 4-H incident report to ensure that the concern and your steps have been documented. Authorities will independently investigate in parallel to steps taken within 4-H if necessary. If warranted, youth leaders or staff may be suspended from 4-H during this time. After authorities share the outcome of their investigation, 4-H will make their final determinations, which may include termination from the organization. Grounds for termination are listed in the misconduct policy, and an appeals process is also available within 4-H. In consultation with authorities, 4-H youth safety procedures will be reviewed and updated as needed. 4-H has an open door policy for reporting concerns of misconduct, harassment, and abuse. Reports may be made by anyone, youth, leaders, parents. Leaders and staff are required to complete an incident report when there are concerns, and the provincial organization will oversee the investigation, consequences, communication, and any appeals. As a youth serving organization, 4-H is committed to ensuring youth and leader safety and preventing incidents or repeat incidents through the education and development of skills for youth and leaders. 4-H will always strive for positive outcomes through coaching and mentoring before considering stricter consequences. But in the case of severe misconduct, 4-H may make suspensions or even terminations. Grounds for suspension or termination include the involved party being the subject of an investigation for a criminal offense, a child protection report, or other statutory offense. The involved party being under review for committing a serious or repeated breach of the Code of Conduct or youth safety policies. The involved party failing to comply with government statutes or regulations, putting 4-H in Canada, its participants, or its partners at risk of harm. Or the involved party's presence at a 4-H event being believed to pose a risk to others. Let's come back to this chart that was shared earlier. At the top, it notes steps to take if there is suspicion of abuse or a child being in harm's way. These concerns must always be reported to authorities and to 4-H using an incident report. The next two rows may relate to misconduct. Non-reportable incidents are those that can be worked out fairly quickly at the local level with discussion and coaching and no lingering issues. Even if you have to call your key leader or area coordinator, you may not need an incident report. These may be the result of expected youth behavior or a simple conflict and misunderstanding, even among adults. More serious reportable issues include inappropriate behavior and misconduct or repeated conflict or behavior concerns. This may include a violation of privacy or personal boundaries, unauthorized contact with a child, disrespectful or discriminatory remarks, drug or alcohol use, bullying, sexual behavior with anyone regardless of age, gender, or consent at a 4-H event, theft, actions that jeopardize safety, or any other behaviors in conflict with the 4-H code of conduct. With more serious incidents or misconduct, the provincial organization will work through the steps in the second column of this flowchart. 4-H Alberta will conduct an investigation to verify facts of the incident and appoint a committee to determine consequences and hear any appeals. As with any incident, a review will help to determine if any policy or procedure changes are needed to improve on youth safety. That brings us to the end of the policies. Let's take a quick look at a couple of other examples of how the policies can be applied. A club has been meeting at the community center to work on cooking projects this year. It's worked out perfectly, as the youth can walk over after school to meet the leaders, Janet and Shelley. Some staffing changes in Shelley's office have meant she is sometimes 20 to 30 minutes late for the meeting. Janet is flexible and is happy to give the members an after-school snack and review the recipes while they wait for Shelley. The issue in this scenario is that an adult is alone with youth and there is potential for a one-on-one situation. The Code of Conduct and the Supervision Policy Rule of 2 come into play. Janet should stay in a public area of the community center or outside with the members while waiting for Shelley to arrive. She should look for another adult to help move from orange to yellow on the Rule of 2 graphic shared earlier. An incident report should be completed to document the situation. And moving forward, Janet and Shelley and the club, if necessary, should work to find a permanent solution. Perhaps the meeting could start later, or a parent can become a screen volunteer and also attend. Maybe a different day of the week would work better. Unexpected situations can arise, but remember, a culture of safety is what you do when no one is looking. Do the right thing. A member from your club has been selected to represent the province at a national youth event. The member is a great representative of the club and has completed numerous projects. However, there have been some challenges at Achievement Day, as this member is quite anxious and often requires a lot of leader assistance. The club leadership is discussing sending another youth instead to make it easier for everyone. This scenario points out an issue of potential exclusion of a youth because of a wellness issue. The inclusion statement is the key piece of the youth safety policy and procedures at play. You should speak to the club's leadership and encourage a discussion between the member, parents, and program organizers so that appropriate supports and accommodations can be made for the member to attend successfully. If there is continued pushback within the club, an incident report must be completed, as these comments by leaders do not support the 4-H inclusion policy, and coaching and support from the 4-H Alberta organization would be appropriate. As a positive youth development organization, it is always our goal to provide youth with the opportunity to develop skills, tap into their strengths, and build assets. Your role as a leader is to help find ways to support all youth in the programs and success. Mavis is a trained leader with up-to-date police screening and has completed the Commit to Kids training. Mavis has been a model project leader for the last 12 years, and the members enjoy the new project ideas she has. In the past, Mavis has requested there only be 1 or 2 members in the sewing project that meets at her home, so she can give them her undivided attention and they can each use one of her sewing machines. Recently, a parent has raised concerns about this setup, as her daughter feels uncomfortable alone at Mavis's home, and she has some friends that are also interested in joining. The issues in this scenario are that Mavis is meeting alone with youth. It is not safe, not inclusive to others wanting to join, and youth have expressed that it's not fun being there alone. The Supervision Policy Rule of 2, the Code of Conduct, and a reminder of the Positive Youth Development Formula should be considered. As a trained club leader, your role is to document the parent's concern in an incident report, as Mavis was working alone with youth. Support Mavis in finding an alternate solution that meets all the supervision requirements and could maybe engage more youth. For example, you could find another screened leader to attend the meetings with Mavis, or have Mavis hold her project meetings at a multi-club venue where there are other leaders present at the same time. Look at how the steps could be divided to allow for more members to join. Maybe stations for cutting, ironing, and sewing, or perhaps some additional portable sewing machines could be borrowed. Remember, youth enjoy being together and sharing a common interest. As the organization transitions to the new youth safety policies and youth industry best practices, it is expected that there will be some changes required to the way clubs meet and projects are completed. Club leaders need to have open, collaborative discussions to ensure that youth safety is a priority in their club and project planning. You overhear a member mocking another 4-H member about their weight during a community garden club meeting. When you address this with the upset member, you find out this has been an ongoing issue at 4-H meetings, school, and through social media. You realize that what you witnessed was not the first incident, and it is an issue of bullying. This scenario outlines the issue of a member being repeatedly harassed by another 4-H member. This is a breach of the code of conduct, and the misconduct policy will need to be looked at. As a leader, if you have a 4-H member who is experiencing bullying, it is important for you to remind them that it is not their fault and that they are not alone. Refer to the 4-H Canada Healthy Living tip sheet on understanding bullying for tips on how you could support the member to speak up and how to address the issue with others involved. For minor breaches of the 4-H Code of Conduct, a review and discussion should be completed at the local level. Gather information from the member being bullied, the person bullying, and witnesses to understand the severity of the situation. If the case is confined to teasing and name-calling, bullying research suggests a facilitated face-to-face meeting with the youth involved is the most effective in ending harassment and building positive relationships. Reach out to the 4-H Alberta organization if you need some guidance. If the incidents are more severe, involving swearing, threats, or discriminatory remarks, or the safety or well-being of a youth is being compromised, complete an incident report and wait for some direction from 4-H Alberta. As a youth-serving organization, 4-H is committed to ensuring youth and leader safety and preventing incidents or repeat incidents through education and development of skills for youth and leaders. 4-H will always strive for positive outcomes through coaching and mentoring first, before considering stricter consequences. And the final scenario, Betty is your 4-H co-leader and mother to one of your members. Your canine project is going to go visit a local kennel club show. The members will be dropped off outside the show at 9 a.m. to meet up with you and Betty to head inside together. On the morning of the event, Betty gets a frantic call from 4-H member Rachel's mom. She has been called into work and really hoped that Betty could take Rachel to the show. Rachel and Betty's daughters are best friends, and the two families have a long relationship, often carpooling to hockey. Betty calls you to ask if she can drive Rachel and her daughter to the show, just the three of them in one car. Unfortunately, there is no time for you to meet up and all go in one car. Betty won't be following the rule of two. So the supervision policy rule of two, the transportation policy, the safety assessment and management policy are all important to consider. An activity plan was not needed initially, as this club was not organizing the transportation. If Betty does agree to drive Rachel, she does so with the understanding it is in her role as a family friend and not as a 4-H leader. As transportation was not formally organized, it is not part of the official program and would not be covered by 4-H insurance. Even though this is not part of the 4-H program, the rule of two is still a best practice that you should model as a leader. This type of situation should be avoided whenever possible. At the beginning of each club year, review the transportation policy with families. Although you may want to help out another family, 4-H leaders should always model youth safety best practices and have another screened adult in the vehicle, even for informal arrangements. While we've covered a number of case studies and scenarios today, you may still have some questions. The Youth Safety at 4-H in Canada FAQ document has answers to some common questions about the policies and scenarios unique to 4-H programming. There are additional FAQs that have been asked in Alberta available on the 4-H Alberta website. I encourage you to take a look at both. As we reach the end of this webinar, you should now be able to identify the policies outlined in the Youth Safety at 4-H in Canada manual, respond to parent questions about the youth safety practices in 4-H, apply the rule of 2 to club settings and events, recognize the steps in planning safe activities and events, recognize when to report concerns of abuse, misconduct, or safety, access the 4-H Canada policies and resources, and access provincial procedures and resources. In order to complete this training and have it added to your volunteer record, you must also complete the short quiz that is linked in the description below the video. Thank you for taking the time to ensure that 4-H members, volunteers, and families have a safe, educational, and fun experience. If you need assistance, please reach out to your local area coordinator or Stacey Murray at stacy.murray@4hab.com. Thank you.